Okay, Steve, thanks very much for the introduction in the beginning. And so it's been really good. I've really enjoyed it. And I've learned stuff along the way. And I've shared stuff along the way. But most of all, what I'd love to do is the formation of Steve as a person, from being in the army to begin with and starting out, as I can see this Steve at 6'2", 6'3", but physically capable, because you didn't realise probably how good you were, but certainly being in the army, you would have become much, much more physically capable as you grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me about the kind of stages, what you actually, not about the training, but what did you actually go through? Because you became, in those words, a ranking person within the army. So talk to me about the stages that you went through.
How do I respond to the stages? So
when was your first promotion when you first started?
So first promotion would have been during Northern Ireland, where I did we call it a junior NCO's CARDA, and that's 6 weeks where they take you through the ringer and you come out of it as a Lance Corporal. So you've got, I think it's a very, very clever system in the military when you look at the promotion side of life, because the way that you are shaped as an individual, and it's not infallible. I think I've seen good and bad, but generally speaking, you will develop as an individual, and they'll develop you as an individual, and then they'll identify when you're ready, when they want to put you forward, or you're going to put your hand up and say, I want to go for my NCO's CARDA, and you work up through the ranks. So first rank is obviously private soldier when you join. And then there are levels to that. So you got, in our day, grade 1 to 4 private soldier, and you get to grade 4, and you can then start looking at a promotion. And then the Lance Corporal, Corporal, Sergeant, Colour Sergeant, appointments as Sergeant Major, WO1 RSM, and then obviously the commissioning side of life. And I think the whole process of going through that in life, you mature as you go. So in the book, I talk a little bit about the identity iceberg, and I think the identity iceberg is probably a really good metaphor for what happens as you grow in the service. Okay. So what we see on an iceberg is that top 20%, and 90 or 80%, can't even do the maths, 80% below the surface is what you don't see. So above the surface, you see the actions, the decisions, and the results of those actions and decisions. That's what we present everybody. What the military does is work below the surface. So they'll work on, right below the surface, your skills. Hence, I said to you earlier on, the only thing that we do when we're not in operations is training. Training is always about honing the skills.
But you say honing, but it's about repetition as well, isn't it?
And I think that is the journey to honing the skill, is the ability to repeat it. And it's kind of, if I go back to my days in Northern Ireland, some of the stuff that I was doing over in Northern Ireland, you had to do contact drills.
Okay.
So if you were ever contacted by the terrorists, then it wasn't a case you had to think. It was just instinct. Instinct kicked in, and then you went through the contact drills, and that's because they were honed. They were repeated, constantly. So that skill shifts. And from that, the shift in those skills, and that's just obviously when we're looking at specific, combat skills, there are other skills that come with it as well, the softer skills in life. But what they start to do is also shift the belief. So we talked earlier about values and standards. So you've got a set of values in certainly in the Army, and you'll have the same in the Navy and the RAF. But then you have the standards. And this is the bit out here that you don't probably see so much. So you've got professional, you've got ethical, and you've got lawful. And those standards mean that it's kind of like for every value that you've got a standard to measure that value against. So if you're going to look at selfless commitment, can you make sure that the selfless commitment you're showing is ethical?
Okay.
That it's not doing something that is unethical. Is it lawful? And is it professional?
But you're constantly receiving feedback in that process. It's probably the most important.
Are, yeah.
Well, you say that. I don't think actually there is enough feedback given in the development of young people in particular at the moment.
I would agree in one instance, but I also agree. I would probably challenge in the other is they're overstimulated with feedback.
Yeah.
And it's just the filtering process of what they're understanding. They don't have the skills to filter the feedback they're getting.
No.
You know, so there's an overarching want and need to be recognized. There's an overarching want and need to work on ego,
get attention,
to be present, you know, to get a thumbs up in a digital world. You know, I don't really enter the conversation when we start looking at the woke world, but if you know, that is the need for someone to turn around and say that I'm a they and them. You know, I've got no issue with any of that stuff at all. You can be a they and them. But what you don't need to do is you don't need to tell me that you're a they and them. I can make an assumption and see, and then I can talk to you appropriately, and I'll, you know, never be disrespectful. But, you know, kind of the need today where the, you know, is if and I don't even know, to be fair, how I, you know, talk to somebody in the they and them context other than, you know, what I see. You know, so if you get that wrong and then they're correcting you, is that on me or is that on them?
It's amazing, actually, isn't it? Interesting, because you raise lots of things. My brain is racing as you talk. My brain is racing as you're talking, because I think of certain situations, it gets triggered by it. First of all, if anybody ever communicates with me and uses a thumbs up, I so dislike it. I've never, ever done it. I would never do it at all. I would never, ever. I don't ever send a message to anybody with a thumbs up. And yet, I notice now in my communication, because I will tend to make an effort to communicate to people, the number of people who respond to quite a long communication and I go, it's so irritating. It's so irritating. And in my world, so disrespectful as well.
So there's the interesting point, because there's two sides to that for me, because there's your world.
Yeah.
Now, for me to understand your world, I'd need to understand you more implicitly in terms of who you are. And then there is kind of like the assumption that you probably heard of the golden rule, you know, treat others as I want to be treated. And today I think that's probably dated. The platinum rule that I work on is kind of treat others as they want and need to be treated.
Okay.
So there is this kind of this paradox in terms of how do I understand who you are now. When I go back to the identity iceberg of the behaviors and decisions and the results that I see from what you do, that gives me an insight as to who you are. And so, you know, are you somebody that is introverted? Clearly not. Are you someone that's an extrovert? Very much so. Are you, task orientated or people orientated? You're people orientated. So suddenly you can start to formulate, where you sit in those behaviors, and then what you present to me and what I see, I can then start to formulate how best do I communicate with you. Okay. Now that's taken me years to come to a point where I can actually start to see those skills, apply them, use them, and actually communicate effectively. And for a coach, that's the secret weapon. But the reality is in life is we don't do that. So when we going back to that question in terms of the military, so the skill set side of life was the very first level in terms of we're going to teach you some new skills. You're going to learn this stuff. And as you go up through the ranks, you're going to learn more skills on top of those skills. But they don't stop there. Your belief structure starts to shift. I didn't even know what integrity was when I joined the army.
Right. And
then I sit there with a sergeant major, and generally speaking, it was delivered by either a sergeant major that had the crown or an RSM that had the royal emblem on his forearm. And if you're sitting there, as a young 16-year-old, and you've got a decorated regimental sergeant major stood in his number twos at the front of the class, you're listening. And it was that moment that then, as you start to progress through the ranks, your belief structure starts to change. And with that, so too does your identity. You start to as your maturity changes, as your belief structure changes, as your skills improve, actually your identity starts to shift. And the identity side of life, I think, is really valuable, because then we're starting to look in terms of, who am I and who am I not? So I very much at that stage started to identify as a soldier. So what was a soldier? What did that look like? In my early ranks, going up through private to lance corporal to corporal, it's kind of like, I've got a responsibility. You guys are my responsibility. You girls are my responsibility. This is what we've got to do. I've got to make sure that you're ready to do this, why, and one thing or another. As you then progress and you become a platoon sergeant, so your identity starts to shift. Now, the final piece in this is when we look at the identity iceberg, is right at the very bottom of that is what is the environment that iceberg lives in.
Okay.
And that's the really magical part in the military side of life, is how they create that environment.
Right.
So when I look at, my daughter is in a corps. She lives in a different environment, and it changed quite regularly for her. So every couple of years, she's going to get posted somewhere else, and there's a different environment. My regiment had an environment. We had an ethos. Fierce pride was our, kind of like one of our mottos, and it was, didn't matter where you were as a unit, you were that regiment. Now, every now and again, as you start to get promoted, you would move to a different location where you would, be posted. So I had a couple of postings out. I went to the infantry battle school as, as a colour sergeant, and then I went to Catterick to the infantry training centre as the regimental quartermaster sergeant. So high up there in the logistics side of life. But the identity in me as a Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment, as we then by that stage amalgamated to, was set. My behaviour, my standings, my decisions, everything was driven by my identity as a Princess of Wales.
But the complexity of using words like culture, listening to you now, it would appear to me, and I don't want to be judgmental because I've never done it and I've never been part of it.
Yeah.
But each and every one of those institutions, because they become institutionalized, do have different cultures. This is the way that we do things around here.
You're right. And there is, in the old days, you were properly institutionalized,
right.
And I think I bridged the gap between a level of institutionalization from when you came in, you weren't really required to do much thinking. You were pointed in directions, go do this.
Okay.
Today, we're now in the realms of actually we're trying to generate and to create thinking soldiers. So there's a whole premise out there, and actually it's not old. Well, it is old actually. It came from the Second World War, but it's called Mission Command,
right.
Where right from grassroots level all the way through there is this thinking piece. But we've got to temper that against technology and what's happening today, and the ability to be able to see on the front line without being on the front line. And we used to call it the long strategic screwdriver, where armchair generals could sit back there and be playing around with the screwdriver, which is actually the decision-making process of the guy or the girl on the front line.
Okay.
So that whole piece, that in terms of how we educate and train now today, is all about creating thinking soldiers, thinking entities that can actually go out there and think on their feet.
But if we layer that, and we layer your description in terms of organizations and other institutions, of which there are lots, because every single business becomes an organization and doesn't see it, but doesn't recognize that they are an institution and that they have, this is how we do things around here, that actually there is a lot of crossover between the two. One is much more formalized, and one would say much more sticks to this doctrine, whatever that may be, led by whoever the most senior people are. And actually that evolution, and I admire that evolution in terms of time, where there has been an evolution about recognizing that I can't train and develop this highly skillful individual and then put them in a situation without being able to think and adapt. And the idea, for example, of being in the middle of a combat situation and the capability of adaptation becomes critical in terms of the performance.
So the biggest difference, you're right, there is crossover. And I think actually if I go back to when I 13 years ago when I left the services, and I one day, now don't get me wrong, I was coaching in the military. I was a master coach eventually. So coaching was a big element of what I was doing. But I was then suddenly one day I was in the military, the next day I got a few months to make this business work and to step up as a business coach as I was then. And the biggest head trash was in my head in terms of who on earth is going to listen to me. And what I learned pretty quickly was actually, I do understand the whole context of kind of like, organizations of delivery, of kind of like all of the nuances that go on in a business, because I understood people. I understood what made people tick. I understand, why we do the silly shit that we do, why we make the decisions that we do. So that side of life I really nailed. And so very quickly I recognized that, all right, as an ex-military man, people are going to listen to me. 13 years on, that's very much kind of like an element of what I do and how I deliver it. The biggest difference, and I think it just goes back to that military piece again. When you're not on operations, you're training, and that is it.
Okay, but I think
life's
there's also
simple in that respect.
There's a great danger, isn't there? Sometimes the simplicity of people meeting someone like you and saying, oh, we've got a soldier. Tell me lots of soldier stories, the kind of legion of going, without realising that level of sophistication
and the
evolution.
100%. And again, if you've got to look at the military in the context of, what is its purpose, is to deliver defence to the country.
Right.
That's the purpose of the military, is, to defeat our global enemies. Or protect the interest of our civil society. So,
right.
aid to the civil service and that. And, I can remember, a few stories of like 1987 when the hurricane hit. The days that followed that were hugely interesting and fascinating. But then when I start working with a business, the difference is you've got a hierarchical structure of someone who owns the business and has grown the business and is looking to find the right people to bring into the business. But everything is on them. Every decision is on them. Every call is on them. Every customer's got a fast line to them. And as businesses grow, they're not trained necessarily how to be a business owner.
No.
They remain the technician. And so if they remain the technician, it's kind of like they're going to be the busiest fool in that business. That's the biggest difference, I think, in terms of how the military works, is you're going through, rank structure,
right.
up through the hierarchy, and you're trained at every level. The only level you don't really get trained at really was when you went for me personally, when I went from being a colour sergeant to sergeant major, then from sergeant major to WO1,
right.
all on experience. And I can remember I had a fantastic posting as RSM. So we were based over in Dekelia, over in Cyprus.
Right.
And the barracks are very, very colonial. So I was on the first floor of the headquarters building, and massive, great big oak doors and a balcony. And then the regimental square, I had my flags at this end of the square, regimental square, Mediterranean Sea. Amazing, absolutely amazing. So, I'd get into the office in the morning, coffee would be on, percolate away, grab my coffee before anybody else is in the office. I'd be out on the balcony, and I'd be there with a coffee and a cigar, a little Hamlet. And then I'd catch any officers that tried to walk across the square, but that's another story. But I think the premise is kind of like, that there's so much emphasis on that, and we didn't. The identity iceberg is something as a metaphor and a principle that I learned since leaving the services. But that principle works so well in the military because of the emphasis subsurface,
right.
and then the direct impact you can see above the surface. So when I'm working with business owners today or executives today, it is kind of like, okay, what's going on below the surface? What are we seeing and what are we demonstrating up here in terms of your actions, your decisions, and your behaviors? And then actually, where do we need to start to focus? And right at the very top, you start on those skills. And they're more often than not soft skills. The ability to be able to communicate effectively. The ability to be able to direct and nurture. The ability to be able to lead.
And the ability to be able to empathise as well, or understand.
100%.
But
definitely.
also, Steve, can I just share with you what I think for me was a big driver to what I do and what I try and live
Please,
by?
yeah.
It was a great quote by Walt Disney, which was, you can create, you can design, and you can build the most wonderful place in the world, but it requires people to turn that into reality. Now, for me, it is all about the people, and every business that I've ever worked with, it's all about the people. And actually, I think there's a lack of recognition. The success stories that we see, whatever they are and whoever they are around the world, they're international companies and so forth, is all about the people. But you also said something else which I think was incredibly insightful, which is that to some degree, people do succeed at different levels in organisation, but they don't necessarily have the level of support which actually helps them and shows them what they have to do. Now you're at a different level of responsibility.
I think the interesting point on that is, that's where the coaching industry really, really can support. But the challenge that is faced on that at the moment is the recognition of what a coach can do.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've been coaching now coming up, probably over 23 years, looking at the performance world, leadership development, executive coaching. Now, the folk that I work with, the reality of business is I've got to go sell coaching. I've got to educate people on coaching. Most business owners and executives necessarily don't have the time or inclination to go and invest in coaching. That's not because they don't have a growth mindset or anything of that nature. There's just they're busy, and they built this organization that is wholeheartedly reliant on them. So then we're going to start to build a team around us, and then it's kind of like, well, how do I build a team? They're a technician, so then they're kind of like, they do the best thing. It's kind of like we were chatting earlier at the beginning. There's no blueprint to being a parent. Business, there's now so much research and theory and background in terms of what it is to run a successful business. Jim Collins, Good to Great. If you read through his 12 principles in there,
and you got the right people on the bus.
100%. So when you start looking at that, you can start to see that there's, all right, so how do I go about doing that? Now, the reality and the reason that I love the fact that our industry can exist is the fact that I truly understand how to be a coach. And I understand the value that I can offer to somebody in terms of coaching them to where they want to get to.
So let me just ask you what for me is a challenging question, but ask you, is being ex-army an asset or is it a detriment to entering that environment?
Being me is an asset.
Okay, but do they see that?
The people that I coach, yeah.
The people you coach may do, but if you are to advertise you as Steve, do some people cynically look at it and go, oh, he's ex-army. What's he know about this? How could he know anything at all about this?
In all honesty, no. And that was the head trash I had. I got over that 3 months, in the first 3 months, 13 years ago. And to be fair, if there are cynical people that are looking at, let's say, for instance, probably the easiest place to go find me outside of the website is LinkedIn. If people look at my LinkedIn profile, it's very much, there's very clear picture of me at the front, and then a darker image of me as my former life as a soldier. Sure. If people want to engage with me, they will engage with me on the basis of what they see.
Yeah, but also people are quite quick to judge, aren't they?
And I won't work with them.
Okay.
And generally speaking, because they won't want to engage anyway.
Okay.
So there's two sides to that. And I say that flippantly because I will work with them if ever they decided to have the conversation. And, the rules I mentioned earlier are right, that I'm the right person for them and they're the right person for me. So I don't profess. Coaching is a really interesting profession because I've done a lot of networking over the years. You've said earlier on that you're very much a consultant. So I understand, many people don't understand the difference between mentoring, coaching, and consultancy. No. I do not roll my sleeves up. I'm not a consultant.
No. There
are occasions I will be consultative because I've got a lot of experience and a lot of strategies. And so sometimes it will be a case of there's something we need to do. So, okay, I'm going to be a bit consultative here. Here's a strategy. Go learn it. We'll apply that. But I'm not a consultant. I coach. That's my default. A mentor, they're brilliant. But a mentor is limited by their own ceiling of knowledge in that particular industry. So I'm not a mentor. If I was going to be a mentor, it'd probably be in the military sphere.
But I also think, actually, I've got a theory, and you may kind of go, Martin, that'd be the wrong way to go about it. I live in a place, right, which has got a richness of experience. And I mean a richness of experience, which is a population which may be getting older all the time, but a richness of experience. It's like a seam of gold, which is not being energized or used within the community. There are a lot of people who've done all sorts of incredible things in their lives who would be a major asset to be associated with some young people. Because if you and I both reflect on our lives and our growing up, I'm sure you can look at all the things that you've learned and the seismic changes that can come about because of that gradation of somebody who's older, wiser. I mean, the only culture that I know that respects that is the Chinese. They almost venerate old people. They view them as wise people and their capability. And the learning that can take place from those wise people can be incredible. And I think that's completely missed because the solution to some of the problems that we have at the moment are around running apprenticeships. And apprenticeships are about an older person who's experienced, who's done the hard yards and developed and whatever, who can hand on and help those skills to develop those particular people. Some of our learning models, I think, are the wrong way around.
Which, to be fair, that apprenticeship piece links directly into, the route of, you would have a mentor that would take you through that apprenticeship. Right. Let's be honest, the nature of the nature of governed society is the next iteration has to somehow be different or better than the last iteration. I go back to, the mid-'80s, we had YTS.
Right.
It worked.
Yeah.
It was vocational. You went out, you could at school. I didn't do that. I went to college.
You were
I was
engaged
fortunate.
and you were involved.
But a lot of my mates, they went out there and they started learning a trade.
Right.
So when they started to learn a trade, they learned that. Some of them are now doing that, and that's what they learned through YTS. Without going into the depth of the educational system, is we know a lot more about what makes individuals tick. There's a lot of talk today about cognitive diversity.
Mm-hmm.
I talk to a lot of business owners about it. There's a lot of labels. We now understand so many other nuances of what we do that we talk about this spectrum and people being on the spectrum. A spectrum means it goes from one stage, to the other. We're all on the spectrum.
I agree.
It's just different levels of that spectrum. But the point then is the simple thing is how do we get the most out of an individual? Okay. And I think when we're looking at that, it's the only thing that hasn't necessarily caught up in the same context is education. We still focus on kind of like the main subjects, English, maths, I think general science, geography, stuff like that, and not necessarily how best to educate it.
No.
I remember when my son went through school, and it did grip me a little bit. He's like me, not gifted in the English and the mathematics, and and I was a creative. I didn't realize it in those days. I just liked drawing, and I was bloody good at it. And he turned out to be the same, but really good at photography.
Okay.
And I didn't go to university. He ended up going to university down in Falmouth, doing natural history, marine photography. Got himself a 2-1 out of it. And we always remember his teacher's passing gambit to him is, "You're never going to succeed."
But I hear that, and it really upsets me.
Oh, massively, and especially for somebody who's come from that background in the trade. There is a chap...
The limiting belief that people get sewn into them. In the same way, and I was listening to you at the very beginning, because that journey that you've been through, the things that you've gone through, are not dissimilar to Scotty's, because one of the things that happened was when he went to the recruitment office, and he only ended up in the recruitment office, right, was because he was on his way. He was in Peckham, and he was on his way to somewhere, and it started raining heavily, and he dived into the recruitment office to get out of the rain, and suddenly is met by what he describes as a colour sergeant or whatever rank he was, who was a big and kind of whatever, and talked about seeing huge potential in him. Those words resonated with him then and continued throughout his life. And so many other kids are running around with the words of somebody saying, "Oh, you'll never, ever be any good at that, or you'll never be good enough to do that."
And I think again, sad as it is, I don't think that's the atypical. It was,
No, it isn't.
It was poignant for Quinn, but actually fueled him.
Yeah.
And he went and did his his bit at university, and he came out qualified, gifted. It's what he does now. Since they came back from their travels, he's just got himself a job with a marketing agency doing just that, and he's already having a positive impact with the organisation, the company, as far as I am aware. So when you start to look at it, it's how do we get the best out of them? So, you got to teach people in the way they want to be taught, and they won't realise that. So in the early years, it's kind of like, okay, so we've got to maybe have multiple different ways in which we teach. Which actually, I think the primary schools, and I think it's Kate Middleton, Her Royal Highness, has talked a lot about this, about how we engage young children in multiple different areas of education, insofar as different ways and different means and abilities to offer information and knowledge to them, and then slowly build that up as you go.
But I think you raise insight into another critical thing, which is understanding how do people learn, and actually understanding that we all acquire and assimilate information in very different ways.
So this really goes back to what I kind of opened up and talking about the difference between consultancy, mentoring, and coaching, because they are different methodologies of delivery. A consultant is kind of like explain, demonstrate, imitate, practice. So that was something we used to do in the military, EDIP, explain, demonstrate, imitate, practice. Consultant can do that because that is absolutely there. The mentor is someone that is kind of like, I monkey see, monkey do. I've got the experience in this particular industry, job, role, responsibility. Follow me, watch me. I will mentor you to get to me, to my level, to my ceiling. And this is where coaching really changes and is such a differentiator. I'm not constrained by any of those things. I'm only constrained by your potential.
Okay.
And the whole premise on that is there's a whole chunk of what you do, what you don't know you do, is where your potential lives. And we haven't even tapped into that yet.
Okay.
Now, if I look at myself as a coach 13 years ago, night and day different from the coach I am today and how I work.
How much
with
is the
people.
big elephant in the room over coaching and developing like that? People's vulnerability.
Vulnerability, well, I think Patrick Lencioni sums up vulnerability in the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And insofar as his pyramid of the 5 areas, vulnerability of trust is at the bottom. This book is all about vulnerability. If we can't be vulnerable, you can't build a long-term trust. And so with all of my clients, very quickly, and if I'm honest, it's not that I give them much choice in the matter, because I'm going to ask the questions that nobody else will. And some of those questions can be challenging. It does mean that you've kind of got to be vulnerable. Now, I always position it in the most appropriate way. For instance, I don't just blurt out. Some people would think, you're a challenging coach, you're ex-military, you're going to scare the bejesus out of me and just say stuff. I'll see an observation, a subtlety, and I'll ask permission if I can make an observation. And that gives them the opportunity to go, yeah, and be prepared. And then I'll position it. I ask every client that I'm working with at the very beginning, how do you like, well, we don't actually call it feedback, we call it feed forward. How do you like feed forward? And they're kind of like, no one's ever said to me, like, wrap it in cotton wool, please, and just do it very, very slowly. They're kind of like, yeah, just tell me. But you can get, because I can understand communication and modes of communication and the type of person you are, I know how to position that. Do I get it wrong? Every now and again. I'm only human. But generally speaking, those conversations are about unlocking your potential, because the comfort zone, in order to step out of the comfort zone, you've got to extend the comfort zone, you've got to step out of it to create more. So the more you step out of the comfort zone, the bigger your comfort zone becomes. The more knowledge you gain, the more experience, the more resilient you become.
It's scary to begin with, but making that
absolutely.
step so important.
It's like the first 3 months of me stepping out of the military. 28 years service, stopped on one day, and I had 3 months to replace my salary with this new thing I'm doing. That was scary. That was a massive leap out of the comfort zone.
Okay. I think there are 2 things that you raised, which I want to go into and pick apart a little bit more as we develop the conversation a bit later, is first of all, trading in the truth, which is really, really hard, although people say it.
I like that, trading in the truth.
Trade in the truth. And I use trading in the truth all the time. And people say, I'm going to trade. They don't. They don't trade in the truth at all. They don't honestly say what they think. Just as the other one I'd say in terms of feedback. And I've worked all over the world in lots of different organizations. The best thing I've ever seen is what are called feedback cards, customer feedback cards. And every organization now has suddenly learned that it's really important, right, to do that. So I get totally inundated with, I do something, I buy something, they tell me about, we're just going to do a little survey on your shopping experience. They come through, and sometimes I'll sit there and go, I'm going to trade in the truth. And sometimes I don't. But when I do, I know that they won't write to me and go, thanks ever so much, Martin. You've made a significant contribution to developing our business. And I know I have, because there are areas that I have expertise that they don't have. So Stu Leonard's, which is the most successful by a country yard, right, place in the world as a retail store, has what they call their feedback system. And it goes, what did you like? What didn't you like? And that's all it asks.
Yeah, so press the button as you walk out of the store.
No, it's what did you like? What didn't you like? And also the other thing that they do, which is just extraordinary and amazing, but it's the innovation of customers. They had distinctive shopping bags that they developed. And you talked about Afghanistan earlier on. There are guys who were in Afghanistan in service, right, in the middle of the Afghan war, and actually they have got pictures of them stood on a tank with a Stu Leonard shopping bag. and they put them up on the wall. They don't display them all neatly. They're just all over the place in a bizarre kind of thing. But the engagement of customers and involving them in the simple thing of a photograph, right, on the wall was just, I mean, it was, for me, I was walking around the store and saw this and went, oh my God, that's so impressive. The involvement and the engagement. And also, I watch people who are walking around with branded goods all the time and carrying their little bags. Some people pay a fortune for bags which have got the brand on them, and they're paying to have that particular brand, and they walk around and advertise it all the time, which is kind of a bit of a puzzle to me. What is it that drives that behaviour? But
I mean, that goes back to the tribe, doesn't it? It goes back to being part of something bigger and recognising yourself on that one. But going back to what you're saying about the trading and the truth and the feedback. So I'll share with you the approach that I have, and certainly with my clients. So we deal in a thing called Feed Forward, and Feed Forward really focuses on when we say, "Can I offer you a bit of feedback?"
Right.
Our brain defaults to criticism. I don't like feedback. What are you going to say? Can I offer you some feedback? And it's kind of, well, you'll say yes, and then you'll brace yourself. And the reason for that is feedback is always based on kind of like what has happened. Mm-hmm. So you did this, and this wrong. That was rubbish. This was shit. You should change that. That's feedback in the very, very loosest terms. I know we can position and deliver it much better than that. But when we start to focus on feed forward, on looking at actually, what's the feed forward in this opportunity? So if I offer you some feed forward, I've already done the bit in terms of what's happened, but I'm now offering a kind of like a route or a solution or an option or some awareness about actually, maybe if you change this, and this, that might be better in the future. So what we're looking at is we're going from past tense to future tense. And there's a play in the words. If you talk to any of my clients, they'll talk about feed forward. I've got an event coming up on Friday. When we do it, we'll have feed forward sheets, which sounds strange, but I'll ask for someone's feed forward in terms of what they're looking for. The brains behind this guy called Marshall Goldsmith. I don't know if you've ever come across him, but he's just a wonderful soul of an individual. And very early on, I was fortunate to get some coaching from him over in, funny enough, of all places, Las Vegas, and that's where he first talked to us about feed forward. And it was just that context and that understanding of the genius of kind of like going from the past to the future and offering someone a route to a better future through feed forward is just ingenious in my mind, because you kind of like you're not bracing yourself for some criticism of what you've done. What you're looking for is kind of like, all right, where's the opportunities to do better? So offering feed forward for me was just, and has been and remains, a default setting.
Fascinating. I think I need to develop a lot more about really understanding coaching. Although I've looked at coaching and the words that go with it as sort of being alien in some respects, and yet I can understand, and now I'm beginning to get a tone around the sophistication that takes place within coaching.
Coaching at its root cause isn't complex. The challenging part is not everyone has the ability to be a coach, because you've got to be, it's taken me it's taken me 23 years to be able to sit with someone without bias, to be able to listen, and to ask great questions.
I think it's taken you a lifetime to get to where you are now. It's not 13
well, yeah,
years.
You're right.
It's a
Absolutely.
lifetime.
It is.
It's the depth. You talked about the iceberg, the depth of that experience and that worldly experience that you brought to it. That's what you dig upon in certain situations. It didn't happen in the 13 years.
It is I think there's a number of different coaching bodies out there that you've got, ICF and others to go, and the skeptical side of me is kind of like they're a different methodology. They bring a methodology in, but there's no central governance on this. So anybody can go out there and be a coach.
Cool.
And I kind of see it all the time. And I've done lots of networking, and I've been sat there and someone has said, I'm a coach, consultant and mentor. And I'm kind of like, probably what you are is a little bit confused. I am absolutely 100% a coach.
Okay.
And, my field of coaching is that of executive and leadership coaching and performance as a general piece. The add to that is the stuff that I do around organizational health, and that's come from a lot of learning I did with Patrick Lencioni through COVID. So I think vast majority of people, and I think kind of like thank you for saying it yourself, is that so many people, probably don't truly understand what coaching is. And it's a life science. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of back end psychology that I've learned. I'd love to go and do a psychological degree, and I suspect at some point I probably will. I understand how the brain works. I understand how to communicate effectively. I understand why and how we communicate in certain different ways. I understand some of the nuances of human behavior. I've not got a psychological qualification in my body, but I can talk to you about, the neurosynapses. I can talk to you about myelination and about how we build, I think in the book I talk about the cornfield,
you do,
and how we go through and, we create these pathways. A mentor won't understand those pathways because they've just got this one pathway, and I'm going to teach you that pathway.
Okay.
A consultant will go, this is a proven pathway. I'm going to teach you this pathway, and we're going to do that pathway together. And I'll explain it and demonstrate, and you can imitate and practice it. A coach is going to say, they're good pathways.
I think actually there are things that happen now in this era that we've grown up with, which still shock us to inability to sometimes understand. So, for example, and let me give you this example. Now we're going to get to the end of it. We will continue the discussion during the break because we'll take a break now. For example, what's the motivation of a man who orchestrates an architecture to steal £400,000 and then buys all the things that he does and is now likely to go to prison for some time? What is it that's motivated him? Why did he buy those things? What was he doing? What was he chasing? What was he actually doing? I think I kind of sit there with my arms folded, looking at it, kind of going, I have no idea. I cannot work that out at all. He buys a motorhome and then 3 coffee machines and what was it?
Don't forget the super glue.
Okay. Really, really I'm struggling to kind of cope and understand. I think his why and what it was about sometimes is just very complex. And I think sometimes in the same sort of way, people are in their life bemused or bewildered about what's going on and not really understanding why are people doing what they're doing. But anyway, that's another topic altogether. We'll get into the process around coaching as we get to the final part. Okay? Thanks very much. That's really good.
Brilliant.
Well done.